Hi, my name is Christopher Stringham. I manage the FATF Risk Solutions Solution Consultant team in EMEA. And today I am joined by my colleague Mohamed Daoud to talk about FATF Mutual Evaluations, best approach and challenges. Hi, Mohamed.
Hi, Chris.
Today we're talking about FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. But let's start by you introducing yourself.
My name is Mohamed Daoud. I am the Business Development Director, part of the Solution Consultant team working with FATF and based in Dubai. My background is the banking and finance sector in the US, Europe, and Middle East for more than 20 years. And I have been focusing this last 19 years in governance, risk, and compliance, and everything to do with anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist finance, and other anti-bribery and anti-corruption programs.
So, Mohamed, let's start with question one. What is the Financial Action Task Force?
The Financial Action Task Force, FATF, is an intergovernmental body established in 1989 by the G7 in Paris as a result of growing concerns about the threat posed by money laundering to the international banking system. On that time, the focus was mainly on drug dealing, narcotics, and illicit money. FATF was not a very known body until 2001 and came to light after the 9/11 terrorist attack and the USA Patriot Act ratification, followed by United Nations resolution the same year. That extended the FATF mandate to include additional recommendations to fight the terrorism financing. Since then, the FATF approach has been continuously transforming over the time to adapt to different emerging threats with additional recommendations endorsed by different UN resolutions.
So, how exactly is FATF organized, and how does this international organization work with other international organizations like IMF, World Bank, or something like Moneyval?
The IMF, the World Bank work closely in the assessment on how the country are compliant with the international standards set by the FATF recommendations. This gives a strong legitimacy to the FATF looking at the legal, institutional, and supervisory framework of countries to identify the strengths and weakness of their system, evaluate whether the procedures in place are effectively implemented, and recommend action to correct the deficiencies. As of 2019, the FATF had 39 full members, including 37 countries and 2 regional organizations. The FATF works in close cooperation with a large number of international observers who are involved in combating money laundering and terrorist financing, such as the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, and several other regulators and international organizations related to law enforcement, such as Interpol, Europol, etc. The FATF has a number of regional associated members called FATF-style regional bodies, such as the Moneyval for Europe, the MENA FATF for the Middle East and North Africa, among others.
Okay, so FATF is an international organization where countries can send their representatives, they can set standards, they can talk about best practices, they can help their members try to meet those standards. Then you mentioned the mutual evaluation review. Sounds like a bit, applying peer pressure against countries. Can you go into some detail about what this mutual evaluation report is?
In accordance with their membership rules on joining the FATF group, countries commit to a mutual peer review system to determine the level of deployment and compliance with the FATF recommendations. These peer reviews are referred as mutual evaluations and take place every few years, where members from different countries assess another country. The FATF Mutual Evaluation are in-depth country assessments and analysis of the effective implementation of the measures to combat money laundering and terrorism financing. Typical FATF Mutual Evaluation team consists of international legal experts, financial and regulatory experts, law enforcement experts, and experts coming from different FIUs.
What are the interrelated components of the FATF Mutual Evaluation?
The FATF Mutual Evaluation assessment is composed of 2 components. The technical assessment, which focus on whether the country has effectively implemented into the local legislation the FATF recommendations, and made them mandatory. The technical review includes the relevant legal and institutional framework on the jurisdiction and the power and procedure of the competent authorities of that country. And then the second component is the effective assessment, which focuses on the tangible result of the FATF program that has been implemented and the system put in place by analyzing the result of the 11 set of outcomes that has been defined by the FATF.
Really seems like a lot is going on there. So how does one of these mutual evaluation processes actually work? I mean, what's the typical journey of a country that's being subject to this process?
The mutual evaluation journey and the process begins with selecting a group of experts who form the FATF assessment team. The team develops an understanding of context, including the character of the assessed country economy and financial sector, the amount of domestic versus cross-border business financial transaction, the degree to which the economy is cash-based, the size of the informal sector, and the extent of the financial inclusion in the country. An analysis of the country regulatory framework is conducted by the FATF team, where they look at the level of compliance of the technical requirement related to the FATF recommendations. In preparation of the on-site visit, the team select a number of areas as scoping notes that are handed over to the assessed country for comments. The team then traveled to the country for interviews with selected representatives from both the public and the private sector, and this to gain an understanding of the country program to prevent the financial system being misused for money laundering, terrorism financing, and other financial crime. Then, following this on-site visit, the assessment team will draft all relevant findings. Based on the findings, a draft mutual evaluation report is prepared, which is reviewed by both the assessed country and the independent reviewers of the FATF. The FATF then hold a plenary discussion where the FATF team present key issues and findings. After the report has been approved, it goes through a final quality review conducted by all the FATF countries and the international observers. Finally, the report, including analysis and recommendations on how the country can improve the fight against financial crime, is published on the FATF website. Once the FATF Mutual Evaluation Report is published, the assessed country is required to take actions to address any shortcoming specified in the report.
Thanks for that in-depth discussion, Mohamed. Maybe let's go into some of the details. What are the FATF technical compliance ratings?
There are 4 levels of rating for both the technical compliance and the effectiveness compliance. The technical rating for each recommendation deployment is either compliant, there are no shortcomings, largely compliant, there are only minor shortcomings, partially compliant, there are moderate shortcomings, non-compliant, there are major shortcomings, or not applicable because the requirement does not apply due to the structural, legal, or the institutional specificity of the country.
So one of the biggest developments in this process over the last, 5, 6, 7 years has been a new focus on effectiveness, and effectiveness is now part of the ratings methodology. Could you talk a little bit about these effectiveness ratings and the immediate outcomes?
There are 4 levels of rating for each of the expected 11 outcomes related to the effectiveness compliance as following. High level of effectiveness. The immediate outcomes is achieved to a large extent, minor improvements needed. Very few countries have this rating. Substantial level of effectiveness. The immediate outcome is achieved to a large extent, moderate improvements needed. The third level is moderate level of effectiveness. The immediate outcome is achieved to some extent, major improvements needed. And the lower level is low level of effectiveness. The immediate outcome is not achieved or achieved to a negligible extent, fundamental improvements needed.
So with this new focus on effectiveness, then the final and last question really is, what about the process itself? Sure, with FATF, you get a lot of knowledgeable people from various countries together to set standards, to do the evaluation, to go through this peer review process and apply peer pressure. No country wants to end up on the list of non-cooperative countries and territories. But does this process have an impact at the end of the day? Is FATF itself effective?
Historically, the FATF review results mainly focusing on the technical assessment. However, reflecting on the lessons learned from past evaluations and realizing that it is not enough because the number of money laundering and terrorist financing cases were still high globally, the FATF decided to enhance its methodology in 2013 to focus on the effectiveness rather than just the technical compliance. The primary purpose of the effectiveness assessment is to ensure that the countries are allocating their resources to effectively address their money laundering and terrorism financing risks. The revised methodology identifies the extent to which the legal and institutional framework produced the expected tangible result in the fight against money laundering and terrorism financing. The new approach was and still a game changer because even though the FATF cannot issue fines for non-compliance, the FATF Mutual Evaluation poor rating will have a serious negative impact on the international community's perception in the poor rated assessed country with significant economical and political impact. The FATF Mutual Evaluation uses mainly peer pressure imposed by the other countries, as well as the international bodies such as the IMF and the World Bank, which urge the assessed country to act. Negative mutual evaluation outcomes not only seriously damage the reputation of the assessed country and embarrass its government, but also generate replicated coercive risk from other international institutions, such as being put in the European Commission blacklist, which is the worst situation for a country and its economy. So the FATF is now on the midst of its fourth round of mutual evaluation, which has been running since 2014. The new approach of focusing on the effectiveness rather than technical compliance are keeping many countries' institutions and companies' decision makers awake at night with the following question: is the sanctions and transaction screening of our system is just a random checklist processing, or does it effectively comply with the real effectiveness as expected by the FATF?
Great. Well, thank you very, very much for taking the time to talk us through that. The fight against financial crime is very critical. It has a real deep impact against real people. It's not just something abstract that you read about on the news occasionally. Financial crime causes real suffering. And it's great to hear more about the FATF due to their prominence in setting standards and driving this development forward. So thank you very much again for taking the time to talk us through that.
Thank you.